Hey everyone, meteorologist Rich Von Owen here for Weather Legends, and good afternoon on this Wednesday, July 9th, 2025. And it's been quite a week, of course, in the world of weather. Condolences and our thoughts go out to the folks in Texas with an almost unspeakable catastrophe there with the rain they had and the flooding last week. And we're going to talk about it a little bit today from a meteorologist standpoint. What happened? What did we know? What didn't we know? What did we see? What didn't we see? And, maybe what does this mean for the future in terms of forecasting? So we've got our Weather Legends today. We're going to bring in very experienced, highly experienced meteorologists that have been doing this for a long, long time. Meteorologist Bill Corbell, longtime News 12 Long Island meteorologist and also licensed pilot here, and also Air Force, okay, right from the Air Force, okay, too. Joe Chaffee, also longtime News 12 Long Island meteorologist, also WPIX New York City meteorologist, and now hanging out in Georgia doing the Joe and Joe show 5 days a week, 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time. Great show, by the way. Hope you check that out.
By the way,
you'll love it. Great place, great discussion, and good map discussion, also insights. And today there's going to be a lot of insights because I'd like to kind of talk about this. It's terrible. I think it's a horrible thing to see in the news. And as meteorologists, our job is to protect, kind of protect life and property, to warn people, to give them heads ups. And it drives me crazy when, we seem like we didn't do our job. But Bill, we'll start with you, Bill. What happened here with these floods in Texas from a general standpoint?
Wow. Yeah. You said our job is to translate the complicated into something that means something to people. And I think that's sometimes a failure in the job if you don't do it correctly, because, do people understand the difference between a watch and a warning? But going back to this Texas thing, again, just horrible. I try not to think about what these people went through. But reading back into the area, Texas Hill Country, Kerrville area, they call it Flash Flood Alley on the Guadalupe River and its tributaries because of this rather steep terrain. The hills, they're hills, they're not mountains, but they're 2,500 feet or so. They are rough, they're rocky, there's thin soil, the rivers are narrow, the river paths, and it's just a place where you get some excessive rain, which has happened this time, and you're going to get a flash flood. And I heard one local official saying, we get so many flash flood warnings here, because it's like a 50-mile area that they cover, that I'm afraid people take that with a grain of salt. There's a flash flood warning, and then I really mean it. This is a flash flood warning.
There is a normalcy factor that comes into play with this, Bill.
Yeah.
You see it in hurricanes with people that live on the Gulf Coast,
exactly,
or on the Atlantic coast. They've been through a number of storms, and they have come through a number of storms, and you get to a place where you just think, okay, well, it's just another, hurricane. It's hurricane season, or it's just another flash flood. It's flash flood season, and that's a hard thing. The psychology that's this is not. I'm not laying blame or anything, but you get used to your surroundings and you get used to what is normal for you, and it's sort of hard to break out of that pattern. And I don't know that you're ever going to be able to get through every single person. And the other thing I would just add to that is that you look at this and you see that it was one of these, I guess we could call it an act of God, an act of nature. So how do you emphasize that ahead of time without sounding so over the top that no one takes you seriously? I don't know. Yeah. I just don't know.
I think in this case, though, Joe, it's like there's an expectation too, like we've talked about in previous Weather Legends, podcasts, is that technology has gotten so much better. And Bill, you've mentioned it, the accuracy, whether it's tropical systems, anything, has gotten great. We're getting really good at this stuff. And then you see this type of what you would call maybe a fail, this is a big, big weather event and a big impact on many, many lives. And in an area that, do we have missing data? Is it just, with the forecast, I pulled up some of the forecast, from days before, And honestly, I mean, I think I didn't see much of his signature saying it was going to be catastrophic. Now, the Weather Service in San Antonio, uh, look, they do their job. You know, more staff was brought on. They were watching this, and like any other event, they were watching what they were doing. But Bill, I mean, you know, you've worked with the government, you've worked with the agencies, you've worked with the news. I mean, like, you know, this is just the job that the meteorologists do. They're watching, they're waiting, they're putting out the warnings. Were they, in your opinion, were they put out the right way? I mean, was this right? Tell me about the timing.
I have a list of the warnings. Thursday at 1:18 p.m. they put out a flood watch. At 6:30, they warned of intense rainfall and a potential for flash flooding. Now, what's a flood watch? Good question. 1:14 a.m., the first flood warning issued for Kerrville. Bad time, 1:14 in the morning. Then there was another updated one after that. So warnings went out, but do people understand the difference between a watch and a warning? I mean, here where we are on the East Coast, except if there's a tornado or something, you usually know well in advance something's coming. You get a winter storm watch 2 days ahead of time.
And it's on social media 2 weeks ahead of time.
2 weeks of time. But if you're dealing with tornadoes or flash floods, that warning time can be very, very small. And that was the case here. You know, you couldn't see 2 days ahead or 1 day ahead that there was going to be this kind of an intense localized rainfall. And that's the problem. Our weather systems can't push it down to that tiny area, relatively tiny area, to say, yeah, you're going to get 15 inches of rain there and 10 miles away you're not. We can't do that, even though some of the graphics you see on TV with futurecasts will show a thunderstorm. Let's say we're talking tomorrow. There'll be a thunderstorm over the western part of the area. Well, maybe not. It may be somewhere else. So the accuracy isn't there to do this too far ahead. And that's where the warning is important, because a watch means something may happen. Be alert. That's the one where you start making some plans. Okay, we may have to do something. A warning is an action thing. You have to act right now. Maybe not for a snowstorm, but for a tornado or flash flood, you can't say, okay, I'll take care of this in the morning. You have to act now. And if you don't get that, then the result can be what you saw.
The Weather Service, I think, you know, this was another example of what happens in situations like this, where the first thing that happens is that the Weather Service gets thrown out under the bus.
Yes.
And once again, they got thrown under the bus by, you know, by politicians who are basically trying to cover their own rear ends and their own mistakes. So we have that. And then, of course, you then present the evidence that the Weather Service indeed did do their job, okay, and did it correctly. The warnings went out when they went out. We could say, okay, maybe the criteria wasn't meant for them to send out a warning. They actually sent out a flash flood emergency. But then we come to find out also that this area, that the town or the county did not have a warning system because the taxpayers didn't want to pay for it. So there's that. And then I've read for some questions about, did people even have cell phones up at this camp? You know, you go to these camps, you go to these camps to sort of get away from all of that all that stuff and get away from social media. So, you know, I kind of think when I look at something like this, I oftentimes think of, you know, when you see stories about the sinking of the Titanic and its voyage and the things that happened along the way, decisions that were made along the way that ultimately wound up them hitting an iceberg. And every time when I see stuff like that, and I think, you know, if one decision in that sequence was different, the outcome would have been totally different. And yet, at the same time, it seems as if there's almost a fate that drives the event, that no matter what you do, this is what's going to come. You know, this is going to be the result.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe. Yeah, it's called the accident train. It's step by step, and you can look backwards and see which of those things had been different. The outcome would have been different. In this case, there was no stopping the rainfall, but were there other things that led up to this? The drought that preceded it made the ground unable to absorb any water. The local terrain around there, and of course the emergency response. So it was just a horrible, horrible situation. Not sure how you couldn't have prevented the flooding, but was there a way to limit the loss of lives? And hopefully something positive comes out of this.
Yeah, and again, like Joe mentioned, I think the other thing too, and it's a big concern in general, because we've had this happen not just so much with campers in remote areas, but skiers, avalanches, even me being offshore on a boat, without maybe, if I don't have an EPRB, EPIRB or something like that, or some kind of honing device. Bill, you're in a plane. What if you land somewhere in the middle of nowhere, remote area? What is the, I think we're in this day and age, Joe and Bill, where we have so much communication, instant communication, and we're almost always on the grid, whether it's Wi-Fi or 3G or LTE, whatever we're connected to. And now the question is, like, in these areas where you're not connected and you fall off the grid, are you in the know? I mean, were these camper? And the other thing too was that it was, and Joe, it was the middle of the night. I mean, what, like 1 a.m. I think it was like midnight, 9 a.m., which makes it even worse. Sure. I mean, were they asleep? Were the phones off? Were they on do not disturb, silent? That's another thing too, right?
If this was 1 p.m., I would guess that the outcome would have been totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
and that's.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a big deal too, because I keep thinking about this year after year. When I go off the grid, when my phone is on SOS and I don't see anything, I'm disconnected. My phone's not going to go on beep if there's a tornado or a siren or a flood warning. I'm not going to hear anything. I'm not going to know. I'm not watching TV, obviously. So when you're in a remote area, I guess maybe the mindset needs to be different. If you're in a situation where it could have been a tornado, not just a flood, right? It could have been anything, right? I mean, and you don't know it's coming because you're not connected. You're not there. And then Joe, I mean, you live fairly in a remote area over there in Georgia, right? I mean, it's like you do have civilization, right? You have. If there was a tornado, you'd hear a siren, right? You would know, right, Joe?
Oh yeah. They were equipped here to handle all of that sort of stuff when it comes to severe weather. Actually, I'm very impressed where I live in Union County in North Georgia by how attuned everybody is here to weather. Everybody's got a rain gauge, or almost everybody's got a rain gauge. It's like farm country up here. And, I live in a place where, depending on which side of the mountain you get all the sorts of microclimates that occur. But people here are very much in tune. In this particular situation, I mean, we're talking kids at a camp. And I know part of me, when you were just talking about being on and off the grid, part of me thinks it's kind of sad that we can't get ourselves, we should be able to get ourselves off the grid in some manner if we want to. And especially kids, they went to that camp to enjoy themselves. It's got a very long history, a lot of famous, people in Texas that have gone there and elsewhere, that went to this camp. But, I come back to the fact that the town did not, the county did not have the warning system that they probably should have had as a county, that that taxpayers should have thought very deeply about deciding not to have a warning system in a place where flash flooding was a regular thing.
Yeah, because they knew this. This has happened in the past, Bill. We saw the dates. If you watch some of the media networks, the 30s, 40s, 70s, 80s. I mean, the Guadalupe River has done this before. It's not like a brand new thing. I mean, of course, this was probably the top one or top two, stages that went up there. The worst we've ever seen. But again, it's like, whether it's 1920 or 2025, if you're in the middle of the wilderness with a bunch of people in the middle of the night, even if with the best technology, the best everything in the world, how do you know? And even if they knew, Bill and Joe, let's say the warning went out, the siren went off. Are they getting the heck out of there fast enough with the way how fast this thing developed, Bill? What do you think?
Maybe not, but I want to go back where a few years. You ever have NOAA weather radio, you guys?
Yeah,
Yeah,
of
One of
course.
those, and it
course.
would alert you. It's in the background doing nothing, and if a warning is issued, you'd hear it. We've gotten rid of
it
that.
makes that obnoxious buzzer sound.
Yeah,
Right, Pete. Yeah,
The idea is to wake you up. We've gotten rid of that because now we have this thing, which is supposed to take care of everything. Whereas that was a simple backup that, I've got one in the closet. I don't have it rigged up to go, but
is it
something
gone?
like that would work.
Is NOAA Weather Radio gone?
No, I think they still have it. I'm pretty sure
They still have it. Well,
yeah, on the boats. We have it on the radio. It's one of the
You do.
channels on the marine radios, and actually still plays. And you'll get a if you leave it on, you get a warning. They're supposed to keep the Coast Guard station on 16, but some people keep it on the weather, especially on days when there's thunderstorm potential or severe weather out on the open water, where you can get into, as you know, a lot of trouble. Believe me, I'm a big boater fisherman. I've gone offshore 30, 40, 50 miles. It's a scary thing when you see that thunderstorm coming in. There's nowhere to escape. You're not going to a shelter. You're not going to underneath an underpass. It's just open water. You got a problem. And again, I relate that to what these kids and these campers just had. Where are you going when this happens, Joe? Where do you go?
Well, if you have, even a half hour, you can do it. But I'm sure the folks that make these things can make it so that a warning will go off, even if you have the darn thing turned off, the sound down to zero and the sleep. There's no reason why
there's a
severe instance you shouldn't get it. What's that?
I think there is because I just got about 2 months ago, I got the latest Samsung, the Galaxy 26, whatever it is.
Okay.
And I think I remember seeing something in the settings about that. I have to go back and look. But maybe some sort of override. But then I mean, do you want it going off for every Amber Alert?
That's the problem.
Good point. That's a great point. Right? How do you know what the difference is? And like I said, the thing is too, Joe and Bill, I think we're going to get to a point in our lifetime when, whether it's a government thing or whether it's, I don't know, that we're going to be on the grid everywhere, whether you're in the middle of Antarctica or the middle of the ocean or anywhere. I think you to be off that grid and to not know what's going on, not be informed, I think is a public safety and hazard thing, because things can happen anywhere. And look what happens. We're going to blame. Look, it's, how do you do this?
I would say the people that run these places ought to be on the grid. Okay. Yeah. Because they're ultimately responsible. I think it's an awful lot to ask the average person to be constantly on the grid, especially if they go to a place where they want to do exactly the opposite, and that is to get off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a catch-22. You did right. That's a great point, Joe. You're getting what a problem. You're going away to get off the grid, to get away from this. But if you're away from this and a natural disaster happens, you may not have any clue. I mean, you think these campers had any clue this was happening, Bill?
Well, no, probably not. And you go camping. When you go camping, and you don't. You're not. It's not glamping, as they call it.
Right. Of course.
You're out there with the bare necessities, and again, I just go back to the idea that the people that run these places, they need to be on top of it, so that the folks that are coming and paying their good money to relax and get off the grid, or in this case too, there was a Bible camp that was going on there as well. The county should have had a warning system, particularly in a place where this sort of thing has happened. And one other thing that I love when stuff like this happens, because you have all I'm going to use a term that you might object to, but let's call them, all the scum come out of the woodwork. Okay.
Yeah.
From every corner. You have the climate change warriors were out there right off the bat. Oh, this is what happens with climate change, and we're going to get it more and more. All right. Well, when you look at the history of this place in Texas, because Joe and I talked about this on the show the other night. I think there were 3 or 4 major flood events of this caliber between 1890 and 1935. Then you had nothing until 1978, and then you had 78, 89, and I think 98
Yeah.
And then after 1998, there's been nothing since then. So can we have this conversation maybe 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now? But they're out there. And then, of course,
Yeah.
you've got the politicians, which is, politics is show business for ugly people. And they're out there galvanizing their own sides with vitriol and saying, these people are burying their kids.
Yes.
They've lost their kids, and you've got one group, making horrible remarks. And I saw stuff online on feeds where people were happy that these kids were killed. I mean, what's
That's
wrong?
terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. I know. That's ridiculous.
What is wrong with people that this is how they react, that for political reasons they were happy. I could show you the screenshots if I could remember where I put them, of people saying that they were glad that these kids were killed.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. Hey, Joe, I just want to show you something. Got Rich on here. Rich, thanks for joining in, Rich. He said there's actually a setting where you can get either extreme alerts, threats, or severe threats, I guess, on your phone there. Perhaps we can check that out. Maybe that's something to consider. Thank you, Rich, for that suggestion. We'll take a look at that. I would like to know that too, because, for my own safety, for our own safety. I mean, look, you've got the technology, and I think, like you said, Joe, that, and Bill, the Weather Service, they're doing their job. They're really doing the best they can. They see what's happening. They're reacting to it. But, it's like if a tree falls in the forest, if you can't hear it, if it's not there, how effective can it be? And I think that's what one of the problems is. And hopefully that can be resolved at some point. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, Joe. I mean, obviously the politics comes in, but I think the technology and the protocol for when people go into areas where they're not able to get quickly to any kind of, a shelter or any safe area. I mean, because how safe are you in the wilderness, Joe? You're not safe, right?
Not.
You're not.
By the way, there's another angle to this that I just remembered that I think bears discussion. That area and a lot of the rural areas that are less populated, those are areas where television stations no longer do newscasts. So they're not getting the kind of weather coverage that you would get, say, in a more urbanized, when you get closer to urban areas. But a lot of television stations have gotten rid of their newscasts, or they've gone to some sort of generic. I will say, from what I have read, that the television stations that do cover that area did their job as well, because there are people, a lot of, not as many as there used to be, but a lot of people do go to television weather, and those people did their job. So it's not exactly, this is not something that should have been, a surprise. It was pretty well advertised, and the TV people and the radio people did a good job.
Yeah, and let me talk about something else, and now, Bill, I'll have you elaborate on this, because I pulled up a bunch of maps. I said, you know what? I wanted to see, because, when it's happening, it's too late. Within like the half hour, 45 minutes, it's happening. Nature's taking over, and if you weren't alerted and didn't know ahead of time, you got a problem. But what about, like, if someone could have told the campers or all the people there, hey, 2 days in advance, don't go there on the July 4th weekend. It's going to be really bad. Did we know or have any idea that was coming? Now, when we have a hurricane, when we have a blizzard, when we have a major event heading, up the coast, Bill, we can see it. We can track it. We can tell people 3, 4, 5 days in advance, hey, you don't want to be in Florida on July 26th. It's going to be bad. We can see that. But this was different. I don't think we could see this. I want to go to some of the, I'm going to show you this if I can get on here. So I'm going to show you some of the maps that I pulled up here, if I may. All right. This is the GFS, okay, on June 30th. I'm sorry, July 2nd. This is actually, June 30th. Now look at Texas, okay? Look, I mean, this is going July 2nd, Wednesday, okay? Like Joe, repeat for all of us, when was the main hit of this rain? July 3rd, 4th, something like that?
I think was it the, I'm not sure now. Was it the night of the 3rd going into the
Thursday,
4th?
The day before.
Okay,
Right, the night of the
so
3rd
Bill,
going into the 4th.
look at this GFS. Again, this is one of the top top prognostic, maps and models that we use, as all meteorologists use. What don't you see across that area?
They're obviously it's not showing anything. My understand, I did not really look that.
There's nothing there.
But that's the GFS. I think the mesoscale, short range mesoscale models were on board with this idea.
Wasn't there a tropical storm, Barry?
Barry.
Well, yeah. They said
and
Barry
that's not
got
even
involved.
showing up on here. That's not even showing
You
up on
can
that.
barely see it. A little bit in Mexico there. I think this is the NAM now. This is more of the high resolution here going into the 3rd and 4th. But I was just astounded when I called these up and said, "Is this right? Is this correct?" Here's the Euro. I mean, this is now going into July 2nd. I mean, even forward here, even shorter term, Bill.
A little bit.
The Euro
a
little bit.
But Rich, the forecasters didn't, they used the models, but they made sure that they over forecasted whatever the models were doing. I mean, they did put looking at the global models, you wouldn't necessarily forecast a 30-inch rainfall and catastrophic flash flood, obviously, not off those models, but the forecasters were smart enough to recognize what normally happens out there in situations like this.
Yeah.
And there you got that little
curl. That is a little curl. This is the NAM now from July 2nd. I mean, this is only, you're talking 48 hours, 36 hours before the main event. And also, too, is that really the area? I mean, it wasn't a little bit east.
I think it's much more
a little bit. But think how large. Excuse me. Think how large that state is, and how small the area impact was. But it's barely a pinhead compared to the whole area of precipitation. So there's no way to forecast that amount of rainfall. Just too small a zone to forecast for.
Yeah, but again, my point is that the meteorologists, whether on TV, whether in radio, whether on the Weather Service, are looking at this a couple of days in advance. And if they're getting calls from camp counselors, from people saying, "Hey, could we go camping at the Guadalupe River, the weekend of July 4th and 5th?" They're probably saying, "Yeah, sure, you'll be all right. Be a little bit of rain." They're not. Who's calling for a catastrophic?
No.
By the way, when they rebuild in all this area, are they going to have engineers that are going to figure out how the infrastructure can be constructed in order to mitigate or prevent a future flood like this? Or are they just going to rebuild exactly the same way?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think that's a big issue that doesn't get talked about enough, that when we get these sorts of events, the issue of outdated infrastructure needs to be addressed. A lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the roads were go back 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. The areas have all changed. They've all been, built up to some degree. They've changed the topography in some degree, and there are consequences to that. There are natural draining systems that nature provides. I mean, Ellicott City in Maryland is a perfect example of this, where they had 2 catastrophic floods in 8 years apart. And then somebody finally said, you know what? We built the highways in a place where we shouldn't have built, because that's the place where the water used to drain. And when they built the highway over there, the water stopped draining and instead just started overflowing elsewhere.
Yeah.
Infrastructure issues need to be addressed here. It's a big deal.
Bill, explain. We talked about this over here on Long Island. We had some flash flooding, and we were trying to compare. Everyone's panicking about the Texas floods. Do we get flooding? We had a flooding event here on Long Island last year, back in August, catastrophic up in the Smithtown area, and also back in 2014 in Islip. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but when we compared what happened in Texas to what can happen in Long Island or anywhere, the tri-state, you mentioned about terrain, plateaus, nooks and crannies. Talk about what that means in terms of the land base that affects flooding. Yeah,
well, Long Island's essentially flat. Yeah, there's some hills up on the North Shore, but out in Texas Hill Country, I was looking at some charts, and those hills are running around 2,500 feet, 2,000 feet. I'm not familiar with, but this is what I gather. And the river itself, probably 600-700 feet, 800 feet, somewhere like that. And don't forget, water weighs a lot. You have any idea how much a cubic yard of water weighs? Anybody? Want to guess?
It's 9 pounds per gallon, so 8 pounds per gallon. So how many
Yeah.
gallons?
About
You know,
1,700 pounds plus.
yeah, almost a ton. Yeah, almost a ton.
That's a cubic yard. So imagine the immense force, that water rushing down the hills into the river basin, and exaggerated by the terrain out there. And the fact that, again, it doesn't get absorbed. Around here, it rains, it usually gets absorbed, except in some isolated spots. But that's a different part of the country. And unfortunately, this has happened over the years. And you're not going to stop Mother Nature from raining there. Like Joe said, you got to work with it somehow. If this can happen, how do we make it less dangerous and deadly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's and you know what we've learned from Floyd, from Ida, from some of the storms here across the Northeast. You know, it's the inland areas. They get it bad. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, the coastal sections. Yeah, they take their beating from coastal, you know, flooding and that. But you look inland. I mean, some of the worst flooding. At least to work in Vermont
last year.
And yeah, I mean,
all of Western North Carolina.
Yeah,
you know, that was unprecedented for them. By the way, I got on. This is on my Android. You may not be able to see it, but if you go into the settings and just go to advanced settings, and you can go to the emergency section. So it says, you know, wireless emergency alerts, allow alerts, which I have clicked off. Extreme threats to life and property, that's clicked off, and severe threats to life and property. And then it's got here, there's an option. I don't know why they have it as an option, because right underneath it, it says, this is for national alerts. And it says national warning messages can't be turned off. So there's that, but you know, it's in there on your phone.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings up the point too, Bill. You know, you and I have been through a lot of stuff here working on the Long Island area, and we've seen it happen, whether it's a sea breeze front or, you know, just these pop-up, look down south, pop-up thunderstorms, torrential rain. They see the clouds go up, and all of a sudden it pours in one spot for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and across the street it's nothing, right? We've seen this, Joe, right? Yeah. Especially down south. I mean, how do you communicate with the possibility of these types of, you know, cells that don't really move west to east or north to south horizontally? They just keep going up and going over the same area over and over again. Now, a place like Florida, I assume, Joe, Florida, they're kind of used to that stuff. But areas away, right? It's different, right?
Sometimes you see it on Long Island where usually in August, you see thunderstorms that are really, really small, and they form basically along or near or just south of the Long Island Expressway. I'm not exactly sure what, you know, mechanism going on.
Sea breeze usually.
It's the sea breeze, yes. And then there's just enough lift, but these are just really, really small scales. And sometimes, you know, you see them on the radar and they look really, really intense, and then you look 15 minutes later and it's gone. So it's hard. Well, you know, you bring up another point with that question, and that comes to mind now. And this is another thing that's happened, is that you know, I was talking earlier about, you know, all the insects that come out of the woodwork when stuff like this happens. The other ones that come out of the woodwork now are these, you know, the weather control people who think this was all manufactured
for another time.
Modification. Yeah.
And also, you know, there was the television station that had their weather radar. They had their truck out with the radar equipment that was on there, and the truck was vandalized.
What?
You didn't see that? I forgot what channel it was. I think it was. I don't remember now the code letters of the station, but they were attacking. They're attacking weather people. They're attacking weather live trucks and television stations with regards to weather. No, it's you know, you want to laugh and about it and think that, you know, that someone is this ridiculous and that's what they do, but you know, somebody's going to get killed one of these days. Some other person's going to have, you know, we already went through that last year with what was it in Washington D.C. that happened? Help me with this, Rich. My brain. Something happened with the Washington D.C. Was it? Maybe it was with Helene. I think it was with Helene that a number of weather people, TV weather people, had their lives threatened.
No.
Yeah.
Was it the helicopter crash that they didn't know what the weather was? That wasn't that. The crash, no, that was different, right? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was with Helene that a number of there were a number of weather people that had their, they were getting death threats.
Yikes! I retired just in time.
Yeah, because they said that we the weather people steer these storms, and they talked about how Hurricane Milton that became a Category 5 hurricane as it moved east-northeast across the Gulf of Mexico, and maybe some people were saying, "Oh, that's never happened before," which it has, by the way.
Right. Never seen that.
Opal 1995, but we won't go there. But yeah, they were basically they were attacking the Doppler radar. It's all manufactured, and the government's doing it, and on and on and on.
I know.
Yeah.
Some people think the Earth is flat.
It's hard to fight.
I know.
But it goes to the argument that if you're trying to think on the idea that you're going to try to reach every person with this note, with what you're trying to, the message you're trying to get across, there is a large core of people who refuse to accept, a scientific explanation for something, and rather accept, this created notion that somehow they're all out. These evil people are out there manufacturing these storms. You're never going to get through to those people. You just never. You just have to kind of write.
Unfortunately, like I said, the media, it's gotten really crazy with. I mean, it's good and bad. The technology has been great with the communication, but unfortunately, there's that other bad aspect of it with the bad actors and everybody coming in that make it not so great. But let me ask you a question, Bill. Again, having been in the Air Force, having been with the news, and radio, how much warning time do you think is adequate for a situation like what happened in Texas? How much time do you think they could have put out for when the actual real rain started? I mean, could it have been any earlier? I think that's my question.
I'm not the person to ask that question of. Unfortunately, I've been a flatlander all my life. I'm not familiar with the peculiarities of the area. You want to make it as far in advance as possible without getting into the cry wolf syndrome, which is a balancing point. Okay, here comes a flash flood warning for tomorrow, and it doesn't happen. Okay.
So that's a big problem.
It's not an easy thing. And believe me, cry wolf is something that we have to defend against. My approach, I think your approach too on TV and doing the weather was always, I'm very calm. And when I get excited about a storm, it means business. Okay. I don't go out there exaggerating every little rain shower. Stormy weather coming. Details at 11. I used to hate those promos on other stations. Thank goodness I wasn't involved with them where I work. But,
same here.
Right?
Same here. I agree. I always used to tell people with someone, occasionally you talk to somebody that's just really gets upset about weather changes and so on. And I always tell them, look, if I'm not worried, you shouldn't be worried. And I'm not worried. Okay. When I get worried, if I'm, the day comes that I'm worried, then you should worry.
There you go.
And it's happened a couple of times. Sandy was one. And the 2013 Armageddon snowstorm was another. But that was it. So everything else you can handle.
And let me just say something. I agree with Bill, because Bill and I pretty much, we're kind of calm with most of the stuff. If we were screaming about something, especially Bill, it was big. It had to be something pretty big. And as the TV business evolved, and you're aware of this, Joe and Bill, everything became just, the ratings, the hype, scare me, and it's just not good for the public. I don't think that's a great thing. And what I said in one of our Weather Legends, segments that we did, when you hype everything, nothing stands out. You go, all of a sudden, what's the difference between a Sandy and, a small tropical storm? People aren't going to know the difference anymore because you're hyping everything. We just had a minor tropical system, Chantal, just go through the Carolinas. I called my parents down there. I said, oh my God, how bad was it? It wasn't that bad. A little rain, little wind. Okay, the Carolinas, there was one death there, and, drowning in the middle of the state. There was some pretty good rain, but it wasn't catastrophic. This wasn't like one of your major deals. But sooner or later, you're going to get something pretty big. And I think extremes are a part of nature and weather. Every time we get an extreme, everyone, oh my God, I can't believe it. Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to have highs and lows. It's almost like sports. You're going to have blowouts, crazy games, crazy things, perfect games. They don't happen all the time, but they do happen, and when it happens, oh my God, I can't believe it happened. No, they happen, just not every day, not every week, and not all the time. This, I think, in Texas has happened before based upon what I've been looking at and reading, right, Joe? I mean, this isn't like something that never happened before. It just was pretty much one of the extreme levels of this. And sooner or later, it happened. And it could have happened anywhere. It could have been in Kentucky. It could have been in Missouri. It could have been in Louisiana. It could have been in North Dakota, Minnesota. I mean, it's just picked on Texas. It's just a bad kind of circumstance for those folks over there.
Flooding we had some catastrophic flooding in the spring in Kentucky. We had, Western North Carolina last year with Hurricane Helene. I mean, these things happen. You get them a couple of times a year. Sometimes some years you get more. Some years you get less. It's part of the world we live in, and there's a natural cycle of these things happening all at once, and then you can go decades without it happening at all. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want to ever see this. I mean, it's just it's one of those things where like I said in the beginning, the impacts, they just. You don't want to see and hear about death, about casualties, about property damage, because again, our job as meteorologists is to kind of act like Nostradamus, to be the foreseers, to know what's happening. That's our job, to predict. And when this happens, I mean, you don't get a do-over. You can't go back. Oops, let's do it again. It's done. It's happened, and there's nothing anybody can do about it right now. But nature is, in some places, the country, whether it's here, whether it's other places, it's a crazy thing, and this isn't like, I'm sure other parts of the world, Bill, Philippines, China, right? Japan, right? Australia.
It's weather.
It's not just the United States, but to Joe, to your point, United States is a vast area. We got a lot of crazy weather, more tornadoes, the Gulf, you've got the mountains, you got the West, you got what happened in January with the fires, you got extreme cold outbreaks, East Coast, Bill, blizzards, our neck of the woods, lake effect snow that killed. How many people did that kill back in Buffalo a few years ago with the lake effect? They got stranded.
Another example of the Weather Service being thrown under the bus after forecasting what they did in Buffalo 3 days in advance.
Yeah. I know.
Really? The New York State, Mr. Cuomo, as I often say on our show, we never used to get snowstorms like this.
Yeah, Buffalo, right? Okay, I think it's
1820.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think in Texas, they've seen this rain before. I mean, we remember Bill Harvey. I mean, what happened with Harvey? Bill, explain. Yeah,
what was the flash flood thing?
Harvey was brilliantly forecasted by everybody in terms of the rainfall that ensued.
That took over a couple of days. This thing was hours, less than an hour.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Different ballgame.
But what we're also seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, from a meteorological standpoint, the geek standpoint, a lot of the really catastrophic stuff that we see, with the exception of derechos perhaps, is when things stop and slow down and bundle and stay over one little area. When things kind of move along, it seems like, all right, you get your taste, you get your dose, and then it's over, But when they stay in one spot over, like, take, for example, Helene, it just stayed there. You had the front coming in, then you had Helene, and it just stayed there. With Sandy, we had the front coming in, we had the storm, and it just stayed there. I think the colliding of two systems, maybe like billiard balls together, and the forces kind of, they cancel each other out. And all of a sudden, if you're in that wrong spot, you got a problem, because the weather is not going to change for the better. Right, Joe? I mean, that's a big problem, right?
And this should be, we should point out too, that this was not a Category 5 hurricane in terms of origins. I mean, we're talking about the remnant low of a weak tropical storm that you could even argue maybe should never have been named a tropical storm, because because of the fact that it just seems that years ago, I Bill, you might agree with me on this, But it seemed to me that years ago, when they were in the process of maybe making something a tropical storm, they would look for at least several confirming observations that wind speeds were over 40 miles an hour. Now they just, as long as they find like some pinprick out there that's got a wind gust of 35 or 40 miles per hour, that they give it a name. So, you know, that plays into that normalcy thing too, to some extent. But in this particular case, we had the remnants of a tropical storm with tropical moisture. You had the right setup aloft where everything kind of lifted up into Texas and didn't go anywhere, and just sat there for would seem days on end. And by the way, you know, we should point out that this river rose, what was it, like 30 feet in 35 minutes?
Yeah, some ridiculous. Yeah, I know.
Like, you know, it rose something like a foot every minute. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy.
That's what I'm saying. Even if you're warned and you're in the middle of the wilderness, how the heck do you get out of there unless you happen to be on the okay side of the river where there's a road? You know, I mean, I just don't understand, like, you know, with the speed, Bill, the speed by which this happens on a flash flood. And they call it a flash flood for that reason. You know, it's happening so quickly. I mean, in the city, like I said, in urban areas, and you know, where you're in civilization, there's somewhere to run. You're in the middle of the nowhere. Where are you running to? And that's the higher ground. What's higher ground, Bill? Where is it?
Look, it's the risk of life. Everything we do entails some form of risk,
including taking a Tylenol.
Yeah.
So you weigh that in, and obviously people who enjoy the rural areas and camping, you know, the risk is minor enough, and really it is to enjoy yourself. These things happen. A meteor, you know, an asteroid could come crashing through my roof here and kill me. You know,
we had that happen here last week.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I saw the meteor down south. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. But, you know, I'll close out here. We're not going to go on forever because we could. But I just want to say, it's like, you know, it's tough to watch this. And I always try to tell myself, you know, when I see this on the news, it's a big world. You know, you, me, Bill, Joe, everybody here, you know, what could we have possibly done? Did we know? Did anybody know 2 days before that you could have gotten a bullhorn and said to that camp, you know, don't go. But, you know, stuff happens all the time. But like you mentioned, you're taking risk, whether you're in the mountains, whether you're going to Yosemite National Park, whether you're going skiing, and whether you're going out on the open ocean, you know, in the middle of nowhere. Oh, Bill, flying, Bill. Tell me about flying a little bit. When you fly somewhere, like if something happens to you, you get stuck somewhere. What do? How do you get found? You got a beacon. Yeah, obviously there's a way to find you.
Yeah, same as you have in a boat. Yeah, it's a satellite thing that sends a signal up to the satellite and alerts air traffic control and the Air Force and the Civil Air Patrol, and they come. It goes off automatically, or you can set it off.
All right. So, but if you're in the middle of nowhere, even if you're in the middle of nowhere, they'll find you. Like in the middle of, you know, that's what I'm saying. But if you're on the ground without that kind of technology, Joe, you got a problem. You got a big problem.
Clearly.
So,
look, this is. I think in the last analysis, when you look at this was a. I go back to my Titanic analogy.
Yeah.
This was a series of things that just went wrong, and when you look at it, sometimes things. This is I guess a good example of what can fall through the cracks. It just did.
Yeah. And again, I agree. It's like, I think it's unfair to blame really good seasoned meteorologists in the San Antonio office. I mean, how bad do you think they feel? I mean, my God, you know, what are they thinking right now?
They did their job. They did their job. They sent their warnings out. Everything was out there. My guess is when they look at this, they're going to look at the fact that the county did not have a warning system in place, that they're going to have to figure out what to do about the infrastructure when they rebuild, so that maybe it would make a repeat performance of this less likely. Maybe the camp needs to be relocated someplace else away from the river. That might not be a bad idea, but
makes you think. And this is across the nation, Joe, not just Texas. This is everywhere. That makes you kind of wonder. You go down whitewater river rafting. You know, anywhere. I mean, you're in the. Things could happen. And Bill, what's your thought? I mean, is there any solution, or is this just something that happened?
You have to live your life. Those camps are by the water for a reason.
Yeah.
You're going to put them higher up and draw. There's no sense in that. You go out on a boat, Rich. I fly a plane. Joe gardens. Okay, each one and a tree.
Still different.
Well, about a tree fell on.
Well, I had a tree fall on my
right. Suppose you were gardening and the tree fell on.
Which I was yesterday. I was
there
in that bed.
Come on.
I put the last plants down yesterday, and I was all done. And this huge tree branch snapped at around 11:30 this morning. And came crashing down, and it was sunny.
Okay.
There was no storm around. It wasn't a breath of wind. It was mostly sunny.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it here. A lot of it's just, wrong place. Like I said, wrong place, wrong time, and it's timing too. If it was a day or two later, day or two earlier, maybe they would have all been saved. Maybe they would have been okay. But that's just one of those things. But again, I think it's different than per se when a hurricane or Sandy or something comes, where we can warn you. We can say something bad's coming. 2 days before that, they probably had no idea there was going to be the flood of the century there. I don't think anybody,
no.
It's just, it sucks, but, again, as meteorologists, what we do, I think we do our best with the technology that we have, with the experience that we have. And I give credit to all the National Weather Service meteorologists across the entire country that are doing this 24/7. Just thoughts go out to everybody affected. And, I just don't know what to say. I mean, I think these Weather Service office, members in San Antonio office, that's tough. That's going to be tough to go through life. I mean, knowing that, it's just, how do you do that, Bill? I don't know.
There were three offices that were coordinated. You have San Antonio, Austin, and I think San Angelo.
Yeah.
And all three offices were coordinating on this, and they did a phenomenal job. They were staffed up. This had, you can't look and say that if you want to get political about it and say, oh, well, it's the budget cuts that they did at NOAA. Well, they did their job. That's not part of this equation. Okay. Even if there was just one person in the office working that day, if he sent out the watches and warnings, he did his job. Okay. And that's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. They did a great job. The warnings and watches went out, and sadly, we still had a horrific outcome.
Yeah. Well, not the thing we always want to talk about here at Weather Legends, but we have to, because, like I said, as meteorologists, this is what we do. This is what we live for. This is our passion, and hopefully someday, maybe things can get better. Maybe technology, communication can get better. Maybe we can prevent some of these tragedies from happening when nature does its thing. But I think, like we've talked about, there's just things we don't know. There's just things we can't see. There's just things we can't react to fast enough, and can't fix every problem in terms of what nature does. But thank you both for your insights, your thoughts today on this. I really appreciate it. We'll probably have further discussions on this. Maybe I'll do a little bit, kind of discussions one-on-one. I'll try to get a hold of Pat Pagano, Chris Femino, and James too, to see what their thoughts are. But Joe, Bill, thank you very much today for sharing your thoughts.
You're welcome. And by the way, before I go, I put it in. There's a link I put up on the chat board on here. You really should get this guy Tom Weber on as a guest. He's a writer for the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal at the beginning of the month did an article about the future of weather. And that it's about going hyper local, and the technology that's going to take us there.
Okay.
He was interviewed on CNBC, and the link is to his interview. But it's Tom Weber. He writes for the Wall Street Journal, and he wrote this article. I think it would be an interesting guest to have.
Hyper local sounds like News 12. That wasn't it?
Yeah, but this is like, he was talking about how the technology itself is going to, we'll get to a place where you want to know what the weather's going to be like on a particular street corner. You're talking about, earlier about these, small mesoscale events where it's, thunderstorm on one side of the street and not the other. This is where it's going, and how we're going to get there, and what happens along the way.
I'm not going to hold my breath on that one.
Yeah, watch his interview though; it was very interesting.
All right, we'll take a look. All right, Joe, thank you for joining. Bill, thank you so much. Great discussion today. And, maybe we'll do a little more on this in the future. I'll give everybody a heads up if we do it again. all of you checking in today, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you listening on the conversation again. And hopefully we don't see anything like this anytime soon again. It was kind of tough to watch. All right. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon, great week.
Bye-bye.
And we'll see you again here soon. Thanks.